So today's talk is about pain or pleasure. Which one would you like? Everyone wants to know about how to avoid pain and create pleasure in their life, right? Well, let me give you a few tips. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Sebastian from Ver la Paz. This is going to be session 5. Ver la Paz means see the peace in Spanish. And I'm also connected to my stress-free peace channel on YouTube as well. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and also a spiritual coach. I've studied many forms of psychology and have been in practice for over 30 years. I have a practice here in Fort Lauderdale called Hypnosis on Las Olas. I've also written 12 books. The most recent of them is called Zeroing Out, The Secret Journey to the Meditative Mind, and Getting Older with Grace, which is a Southern novel. If you're interested in either of those, you can either go to my website, bosebastian.com, and find out exactly where to find them, or go to Amazon or any bookstore. So usually I start every session off with a prayer, but today I'm going to leave the prayer for the end. And remember, if you want to join me on Zoom, I'll give my talk first, and then I'll open the conversation up on Zoom. I can't communicate it as yet on Facebook Live and Zoom at the same time. Also, I want to let you know that I always add these talks to my YouTube channel, registered simply under Bo Sebastian. All you have to do is get on YouTube and type in Bo Sebastian, stress-free, something like that, and it should come up. While you're there, please like and join. So let's begin. There's two kinds of thinking in the human mind: deductive and inductive thought. Deductive is the principle behind the inductive thought. Principle, you get that? Principle is like unchangeable thinking. It's like the law of cause and effect, the law of addition. 1 + 1 = 2. That is deduction. Now, inductive mind, the other part of our mind, is if 1 + 1 = 2, then 2 + 2 = 4. And as you can see, that if part of the statement, if it's generalizing something like if, for instance, you find condoms in your partner's suitcase after he's come home or she's come home from a vacation. You don't know what happened, but you make if statements. If there's condoms in the suitcase, it must mean my partner's having an affair. See where I'm going with this? This part of our mind, this inductive part of the mind, is what causes pain. And this is what we want to talk about today. But this skill that makes and creates human mind that can not only reason but chooses negative and positive thoughts. We have those thoughts and we can choose between which ones we want to think. Typically, we go to the more painful ones because we think that's what's going to happen from our old sense of mind, and we'll talk about that in a second. We learned last week that the human mind can make random connections between things. If you need to catch up with talks, you can go onto YouTube channel where all the Ver la Paz talks are recorded and saved, okay? But I'm not going to keep going over all the same things. Let's say, so continuing on with random connections in the human mind, you can have a belief in God, for instance, and see God as both the giver and maker of all things, but also judge of good and evil, because you see and have learned from parents, teachers, and pastors that God rewards good for good and evil for evil. We imagine then that God is also judging us for what we might do in the present or past. In fact, we can also go as far as saying we can even imagine that God hears our negativity, our greed, our lustful thoughts, and judges the thoughts. Many people think that very thought, which makes them begin to condemn themselves for just having the thoughts or fantasies of something negative, which is a serious problem when it comes to creating pleasure and pain in your life. For instance, in my own life, I was taught early on that homosexuality was bad. I remember being around my dad's bare feet in the living room about 6 years old. And my father said, "Get away from my feet." He was really afraid. He said to my mom said, "Why?" And he said, "If he goes around men's bare feet, he'll turn out gay." I didn't even know what gay was at that age, but I knew it was bad and I shouldn't be around men's bare feet. I didn't connect bad with God at that point. I just knew that if I had a thought about man's feet, then it was going to be something bad that my dad wouldn't like or my parents wouldn't like. Then I was abused sexually at the age of 8 or 9. And so this complicated the fusion of what was allowed and not allowed by two men. Then I was taught that God wrote the Bible. It was the perfect, unadulterated Word of God. There was a law in the Bible that said homosexuality is bad. That God destroyed an entire city because of lascivious sexual behavior. Without much thought, my brain connected God hating that part of me that wanted to please another man or be loved and cared for by another man. It really didn't matter if it was sexual or if it was just connection. Because I was abused sexually as a child by a male, I inherently thought love was sex. So at 8, I created a connection between God and never being able to have love with a man. Even though lascivious sex is what destroyed the city, not love. I went my entire life with unconscious connection that I would never find perfect love with anyone because I wanted to love a man. I wanted a man to love me because I never got love from my father or any other strong male figure as a child, except the 2 males who abused me sexually. Do you see where I'm going with all this? Look at the connections that happened in my, well, it wasn't pre-verbal mind, but in my young verbal mind. God, the judge, the giver of good, the creator of all. Sexuality, pleasing somebody to make them happy, not getting what I need from males, wanting to please males. All of this is connecting a negative outcome to any desire or any good or chance of love that I had as an adult in a relationship. And my very beginning of my relationships in life were very difficult. I spent 6 or 7 years in my 20s, my early 20s, forsaking sex completely because I thought God would condemn me to hell. And as a result of that, I had bottled up in me all this thought that if I did what I wanted to do, have a relationship with a male, a loving relationship with male, then I would never be able to be with God or in God's will or in the world of a loving God. So, I mean, it caused craziness. And this is why I'm teaching this, because I want everybody to know whatever it is they're going through in their mind. There is a breaking down process where you can take what you're fused to and unfuse yourself. But it takes a little while, and it's a process, it's a learning process. And I want you to come there with me so that our minds can be clear to imagine goodness for our life, pleasure for our life, because what you think expresses in your life. The only thing that directs human beings is either pleasure or pain. But what keeps us from our pleasure mostly is that underlying idea that pain coexists with pleasure, just like I thought. That if I had my pleasure, I would be condemned to hell. That if I find perfect love with a man, then I will always have the underlying pain that God doesn't love or accept me. I'm his perfect creation without a doubt. I believe that. What God would not love his own creation? What parent would not love his child? What amazing paradigm of a negative connections to grow up with and to have an untangle in relationships. Looking at them from this perspective, the connection that is kind of scary to look at. Definitely want to avoid it most times. I get it. Strangely enough, though, these same connecting, reasoning skills of man is what makes him or her the king of the earth, above all other life forms on this planet. Other animals cannot reason. They cannot connect thought and reason like humans can. They cannot take a plier, a candle, and a woman, three very different things, and tell you how all of these things can be connected. Animals can't do this. But a human can take some time and find a connection that makes sense to fit all those things together. For instance, a woman had to fix her electrical box in the basement while the lights were off. So she lit a candle and took the pliers to the basement. No other animal on this earth can take a candle, a lock, and a toothbrush and tell you how you can unlock the lock using only the toothbrush and candle. Think about that. How can you unlock a lock, a screw? How can you unscrew a screw using only a toothbrush and a candle? Let's say you have a match to it. The human can imagine that the candle can melt the toothbrush. The toothbrush is made of plastic, and plastic melts. And when plastic melts, it becomes pliable. So if you melted the toothbrush end and you put it in the slot of the screw, and when it cooled off, it would become hard again, and then you could use it as a screwdriver. If you had enough time, you could figure that out, because humans can do this. They can also take a beautiful sunrise and remember the time their mother died, and the same person saw that the sun rise right after he heard his mother had passed from cancer. Okay, so then that same human brain will always connect the beauty of a sunrise to the sadness of his or her mother passing. Inductive reasoning can make connections like this. In psychology, it's called RFT, Relational Frame Theory, RFT. What I described about my own connections with the word God, the majesty of the Creator, and a hateful, vengeful judge is an example of what an inductive mind can rationalize or frame using the laws of relationship frame theory. Deductive thought cannot do this. Deductive thought is law. It is not destroyed by coefficients and ifs. It is the logos, the word of God, and also that which makes all things. So think about this. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's the logos, the Word. And from that Word, he spoke into, it says, it spoke into the darkness that covered the sea, the water, the darkness that covered the sea. And from that, it created. I think the water in the sea basically is what we would call now in metaphysics the subjective mind. The plastic, the moldable substance that our thoughts create. And we create our thoughts, our conscious thoughts, create this substance, much like when we plant a seed in the earth. The earth would be that subjective substance. The seed would be the conscious word going into the ground. We have a choice. You can always plant a flower and get a flower. We can't plant a flower and get a weed. That would not be law. Do you see what I'm saying? The law is absolute. It's cause and effect. So this something has to create what you think. So look, if this were true of man, then we would be in big trouble, right? Because man, I said before, has not only deductive, perfect thought, but it also has relational, irrational thoughts. So if all thought becomes matter for man, then we would end up in a big world of confusion. Think of the weeds that you plant every day in your brain. But as you can see around you, that may be exactly what we see. Humanity's communal conscious mind right now is creating all forms of both negative and positive things. A duality, a polarized society in a world that fights against itself. This is the matter from which I speak. This is why I'm telling you what I'm sharing today, because if we want to change the reality or the objective, touchable, and feelable world around us, then we must change our thinking. If our subjective consciousness were always clear, if it never received false impressions, the spirit would always flow to the point of objectivity, and we would never make mistakes, would never be sick, poor, or unhappy. The universal God mind, being deductive only, cannot refuse man anything. It's so important to remember when you're thinking about creating pleasurable things in your life. What you think, without a shadow of a doubt, what you plant becomes something. It's those negative thoughts in between when you plant it that are uprooting the very pleasure that you believe you want in your life. It's those old thoughts that we have to dig up like weeds. I used to have a garden and I would dig the same weed up every week. That dang grass, crabgrass. It would be like it was under the ground 10 feet. The roots, and that's the way the roots of our unconscious mind is. I'm not even going to call it subconscious mind, because our subconscious mind, it has some direction. Subconscious mind can be things that you've learned in the past. Like you can use your subconscious mind to do an operation. Say you're a doctor and you've learned a lot from books and from practice. You can use your subconscious to pull up what you need to do that work. So the subconscious is not all that bad. It's our unconscious thinking, those frames that we make that are what's dangerous to planting good seed. And that's what we want to undo. The universal God mind, being deductive only, cannot refuse man anything. The very force which makes us sick can heal us. The force which makes us poor can enrich us. The power which makes us miserable can make us happy. It's all the same subjective force. If this were not true, there would be a duality in the universe, and this is impossible of a God that is deductive, that is based solely on perfect, unchangeable principle. Look around you. There's no way that a world that is this complex could be made by something that is not a perfect principle. It's what man is doing with this polarized thinking that we're allowed in this space, in this density of the earth, that is changing things, that's making things unpeaceful. We get to choose between good and evil, and not everybody's choosing good. In fact, maybe more are choosing negativity right now, who knows? But that's why we want to be able to see the peace clearly. Ver la Paz. Okay? Let me explain. There's a great difference between conscious and unconscious thought. For trained thought is far more powerful than untrained thought. If this were not true, the man or woman who uses spiritual principles to change his or her life could not neutralize those things that cause his or her unrest. Even a small of right amount negates that which is wrong in your life. If you want pleasurable things, start negating the negatives in your mind. That's the first step. If you hear yourself saying, I don't have enough for this, or I don't have enough money for that, start saying, I am creating the money that I need for all of my bills and more. What you say is important, and even more, what you think is more important. So we've got to get to the root of what you're thinking. And that takes contemplation and mindfulness. And mindfulness is a learned behavior. It's like meditation. So in other words, our lives and what we see begin in mind. And if we don't begin to control the human mind, we have no chance of changing in the world. Today is the day you choose to commit to learning to control the mind, to turn negative thoughts into positive ones, to take negative connections like mine with God of judgment to one of God that could never hate or destroy his own perfect creation. Are you ready to do this? To change your pain to pleasure? Come with me. Inductive thought can make connections that can help us and also confuse our brain, take us to places that we don't necessarily want to go. If you wake up one morning and see the sunrise and it's magical, you don't want to always think about the death of your mother. This is what's called a fused thought. When we live from negative fused thoughts, people suffer. You've got to get out of your mind and into your life. It's not just that people have pain. Pain is something everybody has. It's that people suffer from their pain. Their verbal mind creates suffering, which is much more than just the pain. If you think about it, suffering is kind of the long-term thing. Can you just observe a painful thought, or do you have to suffer from it? It's a really good question to ask yourself. Human beings struggle with the forms of psychological pain they have. They're difficult emotions and thoughts. They're unpleasing memories, and they're unwanted urges and sensations. They think about them. They verbally, you can hear yourself in your mind think about them. They worry about them. They resent them. They anticipate and dread them. This is what causes anxiety. At the same time, human beings can use that same inductive mind to demonstrate enormous courage, like I want from you, deep compassion, like I want for you, and a remarkable ability to move ahead, even with the most difficult personal histories, anxiety, and stress. Knowing you can be hurt, you still can love others. Knowing that you'll die, you still can make something of your life. Humans still care about the future, even though they know they're going to die. Facing the draw of meaninglessness, humans still embrace ideals. That's the part of you we want to capture. That's what's called the observer mind. The observer mind is when you close your eyes and you're not using your vision, but you're using your mind to imagine. When you start to imagine things, and it might take you a few minutes to do that, you can think of things like the first thing I always think about is I try to focus in on my breath. And I try to control my body and relax my body. That's always, controlling the body is the first step at controlling the mind, I believe. So When you close your eyes, you don't have to just see forward. You could imagine backward. You can imagine up. You can imagine sideways and the opposite. You can also imagine looking at yourself, seeing what you look like, imagining what you look like if you were standing in front of yourself. Think about that right now. Close your eyes and just imagine what you look like. And then imagine that you've taken all of your human will away, your body's will away, to move, to change, to shift, to control. And watch yourself breathe without controlling it. You'll notice that when you're not breathing, when the body is completely still between the breaths, that you feel a sense of calm. You feel a sense where any thoughts that are in your mind disappear. In the spaces where you're not breathing, your body relaxes more. Physiologically, it's because your body and your mind because you're not breathing, that they have to conserve the energy. So muscles relax. And this is kind of like the doorway into the dreaming state, because when you sleep, that space between the breaths, because your body is calming down slower and slower and slower, the space between your breath gets larger and your breaths get tinier. So it feels like it creates this hole of silence where your mind just floats through and begins to dream. And a good meditative mind, a good person who's studied meditation, can create that in the awakened state. And that's what you want to do. Listen, my prayer for you today is to live a value-based life. Go in that direction no matter what you're hearing in your brain. Try not to listen to the thoughts in your brain. If you hear words in your brain, that's the verbal human mess that we want to try to avoid and that we're going to start working on in the next sessions. Stay away from the verbal-based judgments in your brain. You can let these judgments stop and allow the issues to float downstream and away from you. Like what I think about is that there's a stream in front of me always. And there's a stream that's coming from a mountain, and it goes to a lake, which is my mind. And then a stream where it goes down some rocks and far away. And I imagine the thoughts in my head, the verbal thoughts, fall down like leaves into the lake. I can look at them, I can see them, I can observe them, but I want to allow them to float away. I want to allow them in the current of the stream to float from me. I don't need to stay in a thought. I don't need to cogitate that thought with negativity and words, because when I do that, what I end up doing is digging a hole for myself and causing anxiety. So the first step to all of this is learning how to become an observer of those thoughts. Just imagine they fall like leaves onto the lake, and you can see them as words. Something falls down and you see lust. Something falls down and you see the stuff on your desk that you haven't done, that you're avoiding. Instead of thinking fearful thoughts about them and thinking unforgiving thoughts about them, just imagine there's a beautiful light, a forgiving light that's streaming down into that lake. And not only is the water flowing from the mountain and causing those leaves to move forward, but forgiveness is consistently coming down into that lake and causing everything in the lake to be clear. All right? I wish you love, I wish you joy, I wish you power over every negative thought. I'm seeing that now for you. Amen. Have a great day.
I can't believe how much zeroing out has helped me reduce stress. You've got to try it.
Hi, I'm Michelle Prentice, and I wanted to give a testimonial about the new book by Sebastian called Zeroing Out, Stopping Stress in 3 Minutes. Okay, so I've read a lot of books about stress relief and hypnosis and things like that, having to do with the mind. And what I loved about this book, I got it on Audible, and I loved his voice on it. I love when the author reads the book, and Bo has a beautiful voice, so that was really nice to listen to. But also, he was very, very clear on how the brain works and why we're doing what we're doing, and then also how to do it. And he has videos about it too, which I love that it's such a step above any other book I've ever seen about this topic. And it's such a simple technique, and I'm able to do it by myself, which I love. So I highly recommend it. You should try it out, listen to it or read it. I think you will not be disappointed.
I highly recommend Zeroing Out by Sebastian. It's been very helpful for me, and it's helped me navigate through difficult times. It's just a great book. Everyone should get it.
Work can get stressful for me at times, but zeroing out has really managed the way I can view my schedule and my time. And now I can leave my work at work, and I can spend more time with the people that I love.
Life gets hectic, and sometimes I just don't take the time to clear my mind, especially right after work. The zeroing out method helps me to leave my work at work, so I have a clear mind for the people at home I love.
Life can get really busy taking care of my home, 2 careers, and my family, when your mind can't seem to get quiet to rest. That's when you need to use zeroing out.